So, I found this recently. You'll have to excuse my new surroundings. I'm in a temporary office for the time being, so I thought I would just do some stuff on my lunch break while I'm here. So, this comes from not a English newspaper, but an Australian newspaper. It's by A.C. Grayling. But the fact that it's in an Australian newspaper, I think it's very, very useful. Very often, a lot of stuff that has to be explained, basic stuff that has to be explained constantly, because it's very apparent a lot of Brexiteers don't know what they're talking about, is often explained in this. And this comes, again, Australia, so it's an opinion piece, but it has a lot of very good arguments. A lot of them we've heard before. So Brexit is a futile tragedy that will be reversed in a few years. So Brexit represents the catastrophic failure caused by Britain's unwritten constitution and a radically unbalanced and unequal federal arrangement, the union of England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. While the government and parliament restrained themselves within the conventions, an appearance of normality was sustained. And we've talked about this before, how Brexit has caused these big constitutional crises, because you've got England and Wales who voted, percentage-wise voted to leave, but Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland voted overwhelmingly to stay. So in any vote that's going to have serious repercussions, you would expect at least there have to be things like this, and we're going to get into that later on in this article, but anyway, we continue. But while factions on the far wings, both the right and left, the main political parties saw an opportunity to seize the agenda of the UK's relations with the rest of Europe, and they did, especially on the right. This was the Brexit referendum, and it offered then by the then Prime Minister David Cameron to quiet, as he thought, the far right of his Conservative Party. It's essential, however, to note two things. Despite all the noise and dust, there is no majority for Brexit in the UK. In the referendum, the Brexit vote was only 37% of the total electorate. 26% of that population, which, by the way, figures for votes cast on the day fell out, gave a 51.8% win for Brexit. Note that this has been the proportion of the total electorate. It would still not be enough to trigger the vast constitutional change in most other states around the world. They are scarcely anywhere with a simple majority, let alone a small one, would permit this. For such a change, a supermajority would be required with at least 60 or 66%, either of voters or an entire share of the electorate. And the right, only about 37% of the electorate actually voted. So of that, you can't even say that this was a true mandate will of the people. So almost about 5 million people, however, were excluded from this franchise, including 16 to 17-year-olds, expat British citizens who had lived abroad for more than a certain number of years, and EU citizens resident in the UK and paying their taxes here. Almost all of these groups, we know from polling, would have voted for Remain, giving a pro-EU majority in excess of 54 to 55%, and you wonder why they didn't want them voting. Moreover, however, the Leave campaign committed electoral fraud, which we know it was, because it was prosecuted for it, and has since had to pay fines and costs in almost £500 million. The High Court judge said that if the referendum had not been advisory only, which we've talked about before, this was not a binding referendum, it was advisory only. So the government could have done nothing and not even had to follow it. Instead, there is a very good argument that you can make that David Cameron should have not even done anything. He should have said, well, we had it, I'm not going to do anything about it. And he could have legitimately done that and just ignored the referendum, as could have Theresa May. Even Boris Johnson could, if he wanted to, just ignore the referendum, because it's advisory only. The government does not have to act. And this is the other part for it. So because it was advisory only, if it had been not advisory, then it would have been void because of these crimes. So think of that, people, when we've talked about this before, that the High Court judge basically said that if the referendum had not been advisory only, it would have been void because of these crimes. So also note that Theresa May lost her parliamentary majority in a general election of 2016 trying to get a mandate for Brexit. What is happening now with Boris Johnson as the dead cat, the distraction operation? The Prime Minister is a desperate last effort by Brexiteers to drag the UK out of the EU. The 3 years since the referendum have shown that A, the extremely serious economic impact of leaving the EU, and B, the strength of feeling in the majority of the populace remaining in the EU. The Brexiteers' endeavour to use the spurious mandate of the referendum to get the UK out has run through 3 prime ministers, 3 governments, and a lost general election so far. They know that if they can't do it now, they never will. This is their last chance. Demographics and history are strongly against them. Finally, what do the factions on the far right and left want? Why do they want Brexit? So regarding the right, in January 2020, new EU laws come into force stopping EU citizens from holding funds in offshore tax havens. The backers of Brexit are high net worth interests with billions offshore. This is why they want Brexit. They do not want these regulatory laws to come in, because all of a sudden it makes them know how much money there is out there and how much they should be in tax and how much they actually should be paying in tax and how much they've avoided paying in tax. This is a good thing, because it means we get more money in to pay for public services, you name it, all this money that is being held in offshore tax havens could be used to put money into the NHS, for example. And yet they want to get out of it. This is their main reason why they want to get out of it, despite all their claims that this is, quote, a people's, a normal people's party, like Farage puts on, Tice puts on from time to time. They all want the same thing. They are super elites who just want to get out of this law and this regulation, because all of a sudden they might have to start paying more taxes. And so regarding the left, this is the old left of the 1960s, and they see the EU as a capitalist conspiracy. That's why they want out of it. That's why we call them Lexiters. So if any form of Brexit happens, it will not last. It will be reversed in a matter of a few years at most. Sheer demographics guarantee it. The under 50s in the UK are strong Europeans, so Brexit is futile but hugely damaging. It is an unforgivable constitutional debacle. It shows the way to very necessary reform in politics and the constitution of the UK. The underlying weakness of the Westminster model, the parliamentary democracy, is in danger to Australia, New Zealand, Canada, South Africa, India, and nearly 50 other ex-British Empire countries around the world. The UK is the first to fall apart because it hasn't papered over the cracks with some constitutional amendments, as in Australia and elsewhere. And I completely agree. One of the things that Brexit has shown is that our constitution is dramatically needed of a drastic reform and update. But yeah, AC Grilling is right again. Brexit is going to get reversed, because what is going to happen now is you're going to see, if Brexit does happen October 31st, there will be a mass movement to rejoin the European Union, and it will be a stronger movement than the UKIP's ever was, because people will then start to vote for parties wanting to do it, and it will be a massive vote drain, and then parties will be left with one option: to rejoin the EU. So it will happen sooner rather than later, and a lot quicker than I think Brexiteers think. As we've said, the under 50s in the UK are strong Europeans. That is not going to go away. If anything, that is going to get stronger. And one of the things that we've often said is that when Brexit happens, it will destroy the Eurosceptic case for leaving. Euroscepticism in this country will be dead. It has died in other countries. The closest other country like to us that had such a strong Eurosceptic movement was Denmark. It has practically died in Denmark because of what's happened over Brexit. So make no mistake, if Brexit does happen on October 31st, we will be back sooner rather than later.